Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Celeste Manno. Celeste Manno was born on November 30th, 1997, in Melbourne, Victoria, Australia. She was the youngest of two children to parents Eggy Diro and Tony Manno, and grew up with her older brother Alessandro. Although her parents separated when she was young, her father remained involved in her life, providing financial support and maintaining a relationship with his children. Celeste was a sociable and active student who enjoyed sports, dance. Initially, she wanted to become a lawyer and enrolled at the University of Melbourne to study criminal and civil law. However, she later lost interest in law and switched to studying advertising and marketing. In 2018, she landed a job at a rapidly growing e-commerce company. She rapidly advanced in her career, rising from a call center worker to the head of a department in just a few years. She was considered one of the company's most promising employees. Celeste has always been the center of attention, especially among men. However, she is very picky about her partners. Meanwhile, one of her colleagues, Louis Seiko, has had his eye on her since she started working at the company. He is almost 16 years older than her and has shown no signs of career ambition, remaining in the same subordinate position for many years. Despite his reserved nature, Louis Seiko was friendly and polite. He often asked Celeste out, but she consistently declined. Instead of taking the hint, Louis Seiko chose to view her rejections as a challenge or a game. He believed that Celeste was playing hard to get and was determined to win her over. Despite her clear lack of interest, Louis Seiko continued to try and draw her attention through various means. Celeste finds Louis Seiko's attention annoying, but she tries to keep her cool, hoping that he will eventually lose interest or focus on someone else. However, Louis Seiko's infatuation with Celeste grows stronger over time, becoming an obsession that everyone around him notices. Celeste confided in a close friend and colleague that she would never consider a romantic relationship with Louis Seiko due to several reasons. Firstly, she found him odd and unpredictable. Secondly, she was not attracted to men lacking ambition and life goals. Lastly, their significant age difference was also a factor. Despite feeling pity for Louis Seiko, she knew he had no chance with her. Louis Seiko's relentless pursuit of Celeste led to a critical mistake: he neglected his work duties. As a result, his productivity plummeted, which did not go unnoticed by senior management. Louis Seiko received 3 reprimands and warnings before being dismissed in early autumn 2019. As he gathered his belongings in the office, he appeared on the verge of tears, clearly devastated by the outcome. Celeste is relieved when Louis Seiko finally leaves her alone, but she also feels guilty, thinking that her actions contributed to his firing. Manno, as a department manager, thanked Louis Seiko for his years of service and escorted Louis Seiko out of the building. As they parted, he patted Louis Seiko on the back and sincerely wished him luck. The dismissed employee, Louis Seiko, came to a surprising realization. He thought Celeste was hesitant to pursue an office romance because she was his superior, and it might harm her career. Now, Louis Seiko believed that there were no obstacles to their happiness, and they could be together. Overcome with emotion, Louis Seiko suddenly kissed Celeste on the cheek. Shocked by his bold move, Celeste was speechless. She quickly turned around and fled back into the office without saying a word. Louis Seiko misinterpreted her reaction, thinking that Celeste had feelings for him and that he shouldn't give up on pursuing her. After being fired, Louis Seiko created a social media account and sent Celeste a friend request, which she initially accepted. However, when he began asking her to meet up and go out, she politely declined and eventually blocked him. Undeterred, Louis Seiko created a new profile and sent her another friend request the next day. Celeste tried to ignore him, but he continued to comment on her photos, complimenting her appearance and suggesting they would make a great couple. To limit Louis Seiko contact, Celeste adjusted her profile settings to restrict messages, comments, and posts to only her friends. Despite this, a week later, she started receiving romantic messages from an unknown number, which she suspected were from Louis Seiko. The messages included poems he had written, admiring her beauty and trying to persuade her to go out with him. This was particularly concerning since Louis Seiko had never had her personal phone number during their time working together, and she had only communicated with him through work channels. Celeste initially tried to address the stalker by answering one of his calls. Celeste explained to him that there was no possibility of a relationship and urged him to stop contacting her. Unfortunately, Louis Seiko was not receptive to her message and instead continued to focus on how much he enjoyed hearing her voice. Despite Celeste's attempts to block him, Louis Seiko managed to circumvent this by calling from different numbers each time. Feeling harassed, Celeste eventually changed her phone number, but to her surprise, Louis Seiko was able to obtain her new number within a week. Celeste had been trying to protect herself from Louis Seiko, a crazed fan, for about 6 months. Despite blocking Louis Seiko's phone number and fake social media accounts, and ignoring his messages, the harassment continued. The messages escalated from romantic to bold and threatening, followed by demands to meet Celeste. Celeste had no idea that Louis Seiko had begun following her from work to her home, knowing her address. At first, she caught glimpses of Louis Seiko near her home, but Celeste assumed it was because she was too nervous. However, when she realized that Louis Seiko was actually following her, she knew she needed help. Celeste decided to seek police protection, hoping to obtain a restraining order that would prohibit the stalker from approaching her or her home. The police officers were unresponsive to Celeste's concerns, seeming to mock her request for help. They claimed that Louis Seiko had not done anything illegal, as writing explicit poems or fantasies in text messages is not against the law. Without evidence of Louis Seiko following or lurking near her home, Celeste was told to leave the police station. Celeste continued to be harassed by Louis Seiko on a regular basis. During the day, she would see his car parked across the street from her office, and at night, he would drive past her house several times. This constant presence made her feel uneasy. In August 2020, Celeste returned to the police station, this time providing photo and video evidence on her phone that showed Louis Seiko was indeed stalking her. A different officer took her statement and was more serious about the situation, expressing surprise at his colleague's previous indifference. He advised Celeste to go to court immediately, where a restraining order was issued against Louis Seiko, prohibiting him from contacting or approaching her in any way. Louis Seiko's sudden disappearance brought Celeste a sense of relief and freedom. However, that feeling did not last long. Less than a month later, she began receiving text messages from unknown numbers. The messages were from Louis Seiko, who initially begged her to retract his statement and drop the restraining order, arguing that it was interfering with their romantic relationship. Over time, his tone shifted from pleading to demanding. Celeste immediately reported the messages to the police, as Louis Seiko's actions were a clear violation of the restraining order. As a result, he was fined and warned that further violations would lead to severe consequences, including the possibility of jail time, if he continued to harass her. After this incident, Louis Seiko remained silent for almost 2 months, leading Celeste to believe that he had finally left her alone. Celeste met Chris Reedsdale in September 2020, and they quickly discovered they shared many common interests. Life views and goals, which led to a romantic relationship. She confides in Chris about her harassment by Louis Seiko, who has been silent for over a month but still worries her. Chris made a conscious effort to make Celeste feel safe and supported, showering her with care and attention. A month later, in early November, Celeste decided it was time to introduce Chris to her family over dinner. Her family welcomed Chris warmly. The next few weeks passed peacefully, and Louise Seiko made no further attempts to contact Celeste. She was happy, spending all her free time with Chris, and it seemed that she had finally forgotten about worrying about Louise Seiko. On November 15, 2020, they went on a date to a cafe where they sat together, enjoying each other's company. Celeste offered to take a selfie to capture the moment. Celeste loved the photo so much that she decided to use it as her profile picture on social media. By doing so, she also wanted to share the news of her new relationship and make it clear that things were getting serious. Chris also posted the photo on his page, along with a heartfelt caption expressing his love for Celeste. Sadly, this date turned out to be their last. After dropping Celeste off at home, Chris said goodbye, planning to see her again the next day. Celeste spent about an hour in the kitchen with her mother Eggy, before going to bed early to get ready for work the next morning. On November 16, 2020, Eggy was suddenly awakened around 4 a.m. by the sound of breaking glass. At first, she thought the noise was coming from outside, but then she heard more suspicious sounds, including banging, screams, and commotion, which seemed to be coming from within her house. Eggy quickly got out of bed, put on her robe, and rushed to her daughter Celeste's room. As she opened the door, she saw someone jumping away from Celeste's bed and escaping through a broken window. When Eggy turned on the light, she was shocked to see her daughter lying in a pool of blood, covered in cuts and small shards of glass. Celeste was struggling to breathe, her eyes wide open and looking up. Eggy immediately called an ambulance and tried to stem the bleeding from her daughter's deep wounds while she waited for help to arrive. Tragically, despite their best efforts, Celeste passed away before police and paramedics arrived. The medical examiners found over 20 stab wounds on the victim's body, with the fatal blow being a wound to her heart. After investigating the scene and comparing it to Eggy's testimony, the police concluded that the attacker broke into the Celeste's room through the window and carried out the attack in under 3 minutes, before the Celeste's mother entered the room. The attacker used a large butcher's knife, striking randomly, and the Celeste tried to defend herself, as evidenced by the numerous cuts on her arms. When asked if the Celeste had any enemies, Eggy mentioned Louise Seiko, who had been harassing the victim with calls and threatening messages for over a year. This information was confirmed by other family members, friends, and colleagues. The suspect left behind a large number of bloody fingerprints at the scene, as well as DNA on a fence he jumped over while fleeing, which was likely due to an injury to his hand. As a result, it was crucial to detain and interrogate Louise Seiko immediately, as he was the prime suspect in the case, and to verify and compare all the evidence and witness statements. Louise Seiko was immediately taken into custody but initially claimed to be innocent, professing his love for Celeste and insisting he could never hurt her. However, forensic analysis quickly proved him wrong. His bloody fingerprints were found both in Celeste's room and on the fence surrounding her property, tying him to the crime scene. Investigation revealed a prior restraining order, which prohibited Louise Seiko from approaching Celeste. Notably, the night before the crime, he bought a hammer and large knife at a local hardware store. The store's security cameras caught him purchasing the tools at checkout. It later emerged that he used these tools to carry out the violent crime, smashing through a window to enter Celeste's house and fatally stabbing her with the knife. The case against Louise Seiko was overwhelming, with evidence showing he had been watching his victim for a long time and knew everything about her. The final straw was when she posted a photo of her new boyfriend on social media. After that, Louise Seiko bought a knife and hammer and snuck into the victim's home at night to harm her. His actions seemed deliberate and planned. Louise Seiko's personal life was marked by instability. At 39, he had never married, still lived with his parents, had few friends, and had trouble holding down a job. He also had a family history of mental health issues, with a brother serving a long prison sentence for a serious crime. Louis Seiko's lawyer arguing that he needed specialized treatment rather than imprisonment. However, this claim outraged the victim's family, who feared that Louis Seiko would escape punishment. The psychiatric experts ultimately concluded that while Louis Seiko did have mental health issues, he was fully aware of his actions when he committed the crime. He had planned the details in advance, which meant he would have to stand trial. The murder trial is set for the fall of 2023, 3 years after Celeste's tragic death. In the years leading up to the trial, Louis Seiko attempted to argue that he was mentally ill and not responsible for his actions. He spent much of that time in a psychiatric ward. During the trial, Louis Seiko remained calm and detached, seemingly uninterested in the proceedings. He admitted to his guilt but claimed that his intention was not to take Celeste's life, but rather to win her love. However, the jury unanimously found him guilty on all counts. As a result, he was sentenced to 36 years in prison, with the possibility of parole only after serving 30 years. The Celeste's parents drew attention to the fact that their daughter had reported the perpetrator to the police as early as 2020, seeking protection from him. However, her complaint was not accepted due to a loophole in the existing legislation. This led to calls for a change in the law, which would later be referred to as Celeste's Law.